Early voting begins this week across nearly a dozen states, including the key swing states of Georgia and North Carolina. Donald Trump is urging his supporters to take advantage of early and mail-in voting, two methods he previously said, without evidence, lead to widespread fraud. Meanwhile, new voter registration numbers show Republicans making gains across the country. According to one Republican analysis, since 2022, GOP voter registration nationwide has increased by 1.2 million people, while Democratic voter registration has dropped by 800,000. Democrats are losing ground in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Nevada, three crucial states. Joining us to discuss that and more, the Hill congressional reporter Mychael Schnell. Mychael, do you think these registration numbers should set off alarm bells for Democrats?
I mean, a little bit true, because as we know in these elections, the name of the game is oftentimes turnout, right? Democrats want their voters to turn out, head to the ballot box. Republicans want the same for them. And the fact that Democrats right now are seeing a dip in their numbers should be a concern. We saw Democrats' voter registration advantage drop in the key swing states of Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Nevada. That's not a great sign for Democrats. We're going to have to see who turns out. Maybe if some folks are registered but don't turn out, what have you. We'll have to see what happens on Election Day. But it's absolutely not a good sign when you talk about how important turnout is when it comes to these elections.
Now, polls in the presidential race are tightening. A new CBS YouGov poll has Harris up 3 points nationally. NBC's latest poll has the candidates tied. Now, the battleground states are essentially all toss-ups. It seems like the momentum Harris built after she took over the ticket has faded. What trends are we seeing that account for this shift, at least in the polling, towards Trump?
Yeah, this was something that I heard from a lot of House Republicans I spoke to over the summer around the time of the change at the top of the ticket for Democrats. When we saw Kamala Harris picking up all this momentum, I had a lot of House Republicans tell me it's going to slow down. Polls are going to recalibrate after Labor Day. This is what they called a sugar high, and things are going to be more normal and way closer when it gets closer to the election after the summer break. And that seems to be the case right now. As you mentioned, these polls have tightened. Kamala Harris not enjoying that cushion of advantage over former President Trump in a lot of these polls. And this truthfully is a toss-up of an election. We see that in the national surveys. We've seen that in the battleground state polls. This is such a razor-thin close race, which is why, Drew, what we spoke about before, voter registration is so key. It could come out to who makes their way to the ballot box on Election Day.
Now, Kamala Harris is releasing new policy details as she focuses on a key constituency, Black men. According to the Harris campaign, the agenda aims to help Black men build wealth, get loans, and start or expand businesses. Harris will be in Detroit, Philadelphia, and Erie, Pennsylvania this week to talk about these plans. Mychael, according to polls, Kamala Harris is underperforming previous Democratic candidates among Black men. Tell us about her efforts to connect with these voters.
Yeah, we're seeing a real focus on the Black men constituency this week and in recent days as we get closer to Election Day. We saw former President Obama, who was a very popular figure within the Democratic Party. He was on the campaign trail talking to voters, giving speeches, and really honing in on this idea of trying to attract Black voters to the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz campaign. We also are hearing it from Kamala Harris herself just recently in an interview saying that former President Donald Trump is, quote, dangerous for Black Americans. We're really seeing the campaign right now lean into trying to attract and corral this constituency around her campaign. Whether or not it'll be successful, we'll have to see. But it just shows how important Democrats think that the Black men constituency is to their election coalition. The fact that they are focusing on the group at a moment that is so close to Election Day.
Now, Donald Trump is continuing to use extreme language on the campaign trail. Recently, he's been referring to the enemy within the country. That includes what he describes as radical left lunatics. He said over the weekend that it might be necessary to use the National Guard or military to combat them on Election Day. Tell us about this theme we're seeing in Trump's campaign and how Democrats are responding to that.
Yeah, we're really seeing the rhetoric heat up and become, stronger as we get closer to Election Day. This that you're just talking about right now, talking about the enemy from within, saying that it's more dangerous than foreign adversaries, that absolutely fits into that trend. We did hear from the Harris campaign. Harris campaign senior spokesperson Ian Sams said that Trump is, quote, suggesting that his fellow Americans are worse enemies than foreign adversaries, and he is saying he would use the military against them. Ian Sam said, quote, this should alarm every American who cares about their freedom and security. What Donald Trump is promising is dangerous, and returning him to office is simply a risk Americans cannot afford. Now, this has, of course, been a theme of the Harris-Walz campaign for months now, or rather since she took over the top of the ticket. But beforehand, it was a key theme of President Biden's campaign, saying that Donald Trump is this threat to democracy. We're seeing that right now with the Democratic ticket continue with that idea and that theme. And it, of course, comes after former President Trump continues these comments that add fuel to that fire.
In addition to the presidential race, we're also closely watching key races that will determine control of the U.S. Senate. Let's talk about 5 races that are most likely to flip from Democrat to Republican or Republican to Democrat, or in some cases there's actually some open seats. But 3 of those key states are Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Like the presidential races, these races have also tightened. What do you make of these swing state Senate races?
Yeah, I mean, we really can't say enough about those 3 states, right? Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. They're the key states when it comes to whether or not Kamala Harris or Donald Trump will win the presidential election. They're key when it comes to who will control the Senate next year. And look, this is so important because whoever wins the White House, whether it be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, they're going to want as much control in Washington as possible to be able to achieve some of the things that they've promised on the campaign trail. We've seen in the past 2 years this gridlock in Washington with Republicans controlling the House and Democrats controlling the Senate and the White House. Very little can happen when you're working with divided government. So both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, while they're hoping that their own campaigns are victorious, they're also hoping that their down ballot campaigns are victorious as well, so they can control as much of Washington as possible. And it's very possible that that is going to come down to these key races in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and of course in Pennsylvania.
The other 2 races I want to ask you about are Ohio and Montana. These are 2 red states with incumbent Democrats. Both are in Republican crosshairs. Where do you think we are with these races?
Yeah, Ohio and Montana have been 2 of the closest races all campaign season, and they're places where Democratic incumbents are fighting for their political lives. I'm sorry, they're places where Democratic incumbents are fighting for their political lives against these challengers. In Ohio, it's an incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown who's up against Bernie Moreno, a Republican. Right now, according to Decision Desk HQ, Sherrod Brown has a 63% chance of winning that race. Very close, though, very close. And then the other state, Montana, that's where you have incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Tester. He's up against Republican Tim Sheehy. Sheehy was one of the Republicans' top recruits this cycle, someone who Republicans were really excited about. Decision Desk HQ right now giving Sheehy an 81% chance of winning that race. And Montana was one of the places where Democrats knew they were going to have the toughest time defending there. It's a state where Jon Tester is a strong candidate there, but the state is trending more red, and Democrats knew they would have a tough time there. They are having that right now, but of course, plenty of time till election day. We're going to have to see how these races shake out. But again, similar to the other 3 that we were talking about before, these are 2 races that could really play a massive role in determining who controls the Senate next year.
The U.S. is in the most dangerous situation since World War II. Those are the words of Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson as he advocates for a return of Donald Trump to the presidency. He cites the situation at the southern border, the economy, and global tensions. You know, I don't know, the Cuban Missile Crisis seems to me like it was a little bit more dangerous. We were, after all, at the brink of nuclear war. But I don't know, the world in chaos is a key theme of the Republican strategy. Talk about that and how Kamala Harris and Democrats are responding.
Yeah, this is something that we have heard from Republicans. They are really leaning into this issue of immigration and the situation at the southern border. And it's not without reason. It's because we've seen in a number of polls show that voters are most concerned about those 2 matters, immigration and the situation at the southern border. It's also an issue where Republicans have a leg up on Democrats. Republicans have a very cohesive, effective message when it comes to immigration. It's something that Democrats have struggled with, especially as there's a lot of talk about migration and migrants flowing into some of these Democratic states. So it's been an issue that Democrats have struggled with, one that Republicans have succeeded with. So no surprise there that we are seeing Mike Johnson and other top Republicans lean into the issue. It's the same thing with the economy. It's been a struggle for Democrats and something that Republicans have really been hammering them on. So this is just politics at its finest in the final stretch to election day. No surprise there. And we're going to see in just over 3 weeks whose message is going to be more effective.
All right, Mychael Schnell, great insight as always. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Drew.
Less than 1 week after Hurricane Milton tore through Florida, residents in the state are left picking up the pieces. At least 23 people died in the storm, and nearly 1,800 have been rescued by search and rescue teams. Milton brought historic rainfall in Tampa and caused millions to evacuate across the state. As recovery efforts continue across Florida, President Joe Biden announced $600 million in aid for areas affected by Hurricanes Milton and Helene. Over the weekend, Biden toured storm-ravaged communities, taking an aerial tour of the coastline and Tropicana Field, which had its roof ripped off by Hurricane Milton.
And it's in moments like this we come together to take care of each other, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans. Americans who need help, and Americans who will help you if you were in the same situation. We are one United States.
As of Sunday evening, over 800,000 were still without power, but as residents return home, many gas stations are facing widespread fuel shortages, creating hours-long lines at the pumps. Governor Ron DeSantis has announced free gas distribution sites to help provide relief. Our affiliate, WFLA in Florida, has the latest.
This is one of 10 free fuel sites. Other locations include Bradenton, Plant City, and Tampa, but you can find these sites throughout the areas affected by Hurricane Milton. Governor Ron DeSantis explaining over the weekend why the shortage for fuel has been such an issue following the storm.
But the fuel is an issue when you have power out at gas stations. You can't pump fuel. When you have ports that are interrupted, they don't get the shipments in as much. So we have a lot of fuel that we brought into Florida to be able to help get people through.
Gas is so precious right now. Many fuel tankers received a police escort over the weekend. However, the supply amount currently being pushed out to help has DeSantis hopeful when it comes to recovering quickly.
Although we have done fuel support in the past, we've never done it to this scale. As the ports closed, even though they had dockside operations, eventually that had to stop. We went and did 400,000 gallons of diesel directly into the supply chain, and then 500,000 gallons of regular gasoline directly into the supply chain. So some of the fuel that people got at the service stations was a result of Florida providing that.
People have experienced long wait times to fill up, some upwards of 2 hours. Here at this site in St. Pete, they have anticipated long lines by setting out cones to direct traffic and help things run smoothly.
A man was arrested Saturday after trying to pass a checkpoint near former President Trump's rally in Coachella with a loaded weapon. 49-year-old Las Vegas native Vem Miller was found to be illegally in possession of a shotgun, loaded handgun, and a high-capacity magazine, according to a press release. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department said he was arrested without incident and that the former president was not in danger. According to the Riverside County Sheriff, Miller is a member of a right-wing anti-government group. Miller denied the accusation, stating that he is a Trump supporter and had been invited to the event. The Justice Department said Sunday that its agencies were aware of the arrest. The Hill reached out to the Secret Service for comment. The two Georgia election workers with a $146 million judgment against Rudy Giuliani are pushing to collect. Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss won a defamation lawsuit against Giuliani last December after the former Trump attorney made false claims the two were engaged in mass voter fraud when working in Atlanta on Election Day in 2020. The mother-daughter duo have asked a federal judge in New York to turn over two of his properties, a Mercedes-Benz, luxury watches, and portions of his bank accounts, but the fight over Giuliani's assets will continue to be drawn out. Giuliani filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which immediately froze the $146 million judgment and claims much of the property should not be liquidated yet because it has a level of public interest. Giuliani's son, Andrew, has also intervened in the legal battle, claiming 3 Yankee World Series rings gifted to him by his father should not be turned over to the election workers. Both parties are set to return to U.S. District Court on October 28th, where the judge will discuss next steps in the case. Federal regulators announced this week a 2-year shortage of 2 weight loss drugs, Mounjaro and Zepbound, is over. During the shortage, compounding pharmacies were able to sell unbranded copies of the diabetes and weight loss drugs to ensure patients could continue receiving care. The off-brand medications were also sold at a lower price point. But now those pharmacies have launched a coordinated effort to reverse the FDA decision. arguing the change in status will make the drugs more expensive and harder for patients to access. In a lawsuit filed by the Outsourcing Facilities Association against the FDA, the group argues that the shortage persists and the end of the shortage will leave many patients without effective treatment. Take a look at this. SpaceX has made history after catching a giant Starship booster for the first time using mechanical arms. Elon Musk's SpaceX launched its 400-foot tall rocket for the 5th time ever over the weekend, sending the rocket into space from a launch pad in South Texas. The mission's aim was to test retrieving its rocket nicknamed Super Heavy back in its launch mount called Chopsticks. 7 minutes after liftoff, the company successfully retrieved the rocket in a near-perfect maneuver, which will allow SpaceX to refurbish the Super Heavy rockets and reuse them for future missions, allowing for cheaper launches. SpaceX plans to use the Starship booster rockets to land astronauts on the Moon and eventually Mars. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.